Welcome to the BEI podcast. I'm Lutricia. You know, there's been a lot of talk about DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Instead, we're going to focus on BEI, bigotry, exclusion, and ignorance. Our country has been plagued with it since it was founded. Qualified citizens are denied leadership, silenced, labeled incompetent, all because of who they are or what they look like. We ask, what does it mean to be qualified, and who decides? How do we determine who gets to participate in the American experiment? Can we live up to the principles of our democracy, liberty, and justice for all? So I wanted to have this conversation with the four of us today because I think it's important for people to know who is helping you with this. And I wanted you to have the opportunity to talk about why you started to do this and to introduce people to you. So, who you are, what you do, why this work is important, and maybe answer some questions about when you think about how you see our society moving or the nature of ignorance and bigotry, what do you see? So, those are ways that I want us to sort of talk today, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. Well, well, can we start with just you saying who you are and what you do and go from there?
Yeah, I think Michael, you should start.
Yeah, I don't have an answer to that. That's the problem with me starting.
Well, I can tell you about you if you can't tell you.
That would be way easier. I mean, it's I guess the reason it's challenging is I don't really fit into like any one box. So, grew up learning how to be a community building facilitator, transitioned into science and did brain injury research for a long time, and then transitioned into tech and how do you bring people together? How do you do that in a scalable way? What's some of the ethical policies that need to go into that? And, you know, blending in some coaching with that. So it's, just been several different kind of careers over time. And, that's kind of why I balk at like how to describe myself because I don't, I've just never really fit into like, this is the box I'm in. But the reason I do this starts at the beginning of learning to be a community building facilitator and I just don't encounter many people that are fighting for everybody. And so that's really the thing that drives me. And, how do we create a world that works for everybody?
Yeah.
And it's just a unique conversation to have.
And if you were naming, the one challenge you think we face around what you want to do, which is somebody that fights for everybody, build community, build connection and relatedness, what do you think the challenges are for us as a society today? So when you think about the work you do and your commitment to community building and people fighting for everybody, what is the one challenge you see to that as we look at the way our society is evolving or devolving, depending on how you think about it?
Yeah, well, if I can only name one challenge, then I would say the challenge is the brain and just how it operates at baseline. Specifically, that, we're designed to identify our group and defend our group and ideology at all costs. And when people feel like they're under threat, which I think increasingly is becoming true, we go to, we hunker down into our groups and conversations devolve and violence and aggression, is a manifestation of that. So to me, that's the conversation that I'm having with myself a lot is like, how do we get around that?
How do we get around people feeling afraid? And
Well, how do we make the brain work for us instead of against us?
okay, okay. What about you, Taylor? What brings you to this work? What do you see the issues to be? Any of that?
So, I guess let me start off with a little bit of who I am.
You are.
In the few years I've lived, in the boxes I guess I kind of fit into, I would say illustrator, I would say a Not exactly sure either, just because boxes are a little bit hard for me too. But I would definitely say like artistic, spiritual person is very big boxes for me. And why I do what I do is because I think it really resonates with how I was raised and how my father raised me and the beliefs that he instilled in me ever since I was a kid. You know, treat people how you want to be treated. Just because someone looks different than you, that does not mean they're different. There's nothing wrong with that. People aren't treated fairly in this country. That is a big thing. And it's not fair. And it's something that you care about. It's something that, like, you know, you acknowledge and you try and understand why are these things happening. And so doing this work, I think, continues to reinforce and kind of keep me involved in that topic and in that conversation. Because sometimes you can be involved in it, but you might not be a part of the conversation anymore. You pull away from it. And that's not something I really want to do. I want to be like actively in the conversation, understand what's happening in our country, see the changes.
Yeah, I think of you as an artist. I was surprised that you didn't name yourself that way, but I've always experienced you as an artist, and watching your work, that's how I would name you. What about you, Hunter?
Well, I am originally a little queer kid from Los Angeles with a very awesome parents that also brought me up to respect everyone. My dad, he's a jazz and blues musician. So it was very normal for him to be the only white person in the room and to be appreciative of that and not that be an issue like it is for white people that find themselves when they're not in the pack and then they're suddenly with mixing with other people, and that's challenging for people. And that was just always normal in our household, and admiration for other cultures. So it's interesting to hear Taylor say, the way she was raised is very similar for me. Just like good parents giving me solid morals and values to witness and to adopt, hopefully. And then, but being even in the 90s, as I was coming of age in Los Angeles, a very liberal place, but like being queer was still being an outsider, and it wasn't just fully normalized. I don't know that it is. I mean, I don't think it is now either. You look at what's happening to queer and trans kids now, it's horrible, right? So that was my first taste of, oh, I'm not like everybody else, at least in this capacity. There's something different about me. There's something that doesn't fit in. There's something that's weird. There's something that's wrong in my mind at that time, even from very loving, supporting family. But then the rest of the world's TV, whatever, it's just like gay jokes left and right, being called names, that sort of stuff gave me an early taste of like, oh, well, this feels terrible. Don't do that to other people. And so then, growing up, I was always very passionate about art. Was an actor and a photographer, and then found my way into tech now, which is still a bizarre thing for me to say. And then got connected with Michael, and then Michael connected me with you. And, Michael and I were starting our business together where we're making video content and helping people be their authentic selves on camera and not worry about what to say, right? The thing that I always say is people don't need a script. They don't need to be told what to say. They just need someone to talk to, right? It's like, we just need the permission to open up. And he was like, hey, I have this friend that she's got a lot to say. She doesn't have any problem saying what she needs to say, but she needs help getting it out there. And I was like, well, and then she told me who you are. I was like, I'm in. That sounds great. And then it's been love ever since, Lutricia.
Absolutely true. Yes. Yeah. It's interesting. You guys are both, all of you are, a generation or more after me. And yet, in many ways, I think when I listen to you talk about your parents and how your parents influenced you, and I think for me, it was my parents But it was also, I grew up in the Jim Crow South, and I grew up in a community in which we understood that we needed each other. And I've said that to Michael more than once, that as human beings, we need each other. We need those connections. We need that kind of relatedness. And I grew up at a time where that kind of relationship between people and among people who were different just wasn't happening. I mean, it was a deeply segregated environment. And I recognized that there was some, even because I started doing civil rights work when I was like 14. But even then, I recognized that there was something really profoundly wrong with us if we couldn't figure out how to get along beyond our differences, if we couldn't figure that out. I joined the civil rights movement because of Dr. King and his organization. And there were a number of other organizations, but Dr. King's message was beloved community. And Dr. King's idea of beloved community made all kinds of sense to me. And I then began to think about and wonder in my life, what can I do to help that be real? So that's just sort of guided my trajectory. Is how I met, how I became a therapist, is how I became a facilitator, is how I became a civil rights activist, is why I joined FCE and met Michael. It was this idea that this question I have, like, can we build a society that does what Michael talks about, which is we stand up for everybody and we take care of each other? And can we make that happen? And my hope and wish at this point in my life had been that I would not be visiting the kind of almost societal trauma that I think I'm seeing right now, with people being exhausted and disappointed and anxious about their lives, in a society that says, we believe in people are created equal with the right to pursue happiness. And I'm not, that's not what's happening right now. And the reason I thought about this podcast was what Michael said, which is I wanted to articulate a vision and an idea that was counter to what we keep hearing about who we are to one another. Because what we're hearing right now about who we are to one another is that we belong in our different little silos, that there are problem people in the world. There are people we should mistrust and not respect and not care about. And so to me, it felt really important that a different point of view and a different way of thinking about that happens. So, Hunter, if I were to ask you kind of the same question I asked Michael and Taylor, which is, what is the thing you see today that is challenging us? Because we share a common vision here about what we want and what we believe in. What do you see to be the biggest obstacle to us getting to what we see to be a beloved society, a community in which people are taken care of and respected?
I think we're all really fragmented in our own silos, and the micro echo chambers of the internet now, it's worse than it's ever been. Taylor, I've heard her say, like, oh, I've never seen X, Y, and Z on my feed. And I'm like, yeah, I've never seen any of the stuff that you're looking at either. Like, it just does not exist, and we're not that different. So for folks that have radically different views, we can see anything we want to see and agree with or think we agree with is just piped into our phones, piped into any sort of digital media that we consume. So it's really hard to have any empathy for anybody else, because I'm only seeing the things that played the worst sides of me, potentially my most darkest, biased points of view. And so I think that makes it really hard for people to connect, for people to empathize with somebody else. And I don't really know how to fix that now, because it's just getting more and more splintered. I wouldn't say there isn't. I wouldn't say there's a coming together. I would say it's just getting more and more fractured every day.
So, from our desire for people to come together and build community and seeing those fractures happen, do you have and maybe you've already answered it, like, if you could create a remedy for how to fix this, what would you do, Hunter? What would be your, I think what we're trying to do is create some kind of conversation and have an opportunity to people connect with us through the podcast. But what would your remedy be to the fact that we're fractured and we're all in our own little echo chambers listening to content that we agree with?
I don't know. I don't know that there is. There must be. We created it. There must be a way out of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
We didn't create it, but the tech lords that preside over us did. But I think it really just takes effort from the individual to actively seek something else out, to talk to another person, to search for a new thing. Because if you do search for something, then you can go down this whole other labyrinth that is then getting pumped to you. Whether it's information you want or not, that's up for debate, but it requires people to be active and not passive, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Just search it out, to talk to someone and be like, oh, that's really interesting. I'm going to go learn more about that. Boop, 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 boop. And then maybe that'll just crack the door open just a little bit. But if we're just passive and liking whatever's coming up our way, it's only just getting us more and more apart from each other.
Yeah. I want to ask each of you, do you know the stories of anyone that runs counter to your point of view or your ideology? Like, do you know the stories of a Trump supporter? Or do you have that conversation or have that connection? Just thinking about what you just mentioned, do we know anybody we really profoundly don't understand or don't agree with, but we know their story?
Yeah.
And does their story move us? And I can tell you, I think I might have said this, but I can tell you this. So I live in Saxpahaw, North Carolina. It's a total of maybe 1,300 people here. We've got a post office, and we've got a little cafe, and I live on the Har River, so there's the park that we all walk along. I say I live among good old boys, wise women, and aging hippies. One good old boy lives like 4 doors down. He is an ardent Trump supporter. And he has this big sign in his yard, it's like huge. But next to that sign, like right next to this sign that says Trump in these huge letters, is this other sign that he puts up that says, yes, I'm an asshole. And so I have wanted to talk to him about that and ask him, what does that mean? The only thing that prevents me from doing that, quite frankly, is I'm a stranger and I'm not comfortable just walking up to some stranger's door and trying to seek connection. And I've been trying to see if maybe I would see him out in his yard or taking a walk, because I walk around this area quite a bit and I haven't seen him. But the fact that he put up a sign next to this big Trump sign that says, I'm an asshole, I don't know what to do with. I don't know what meaning to make of that. Sometimes I think it's kind of sarcastic and he's just trying to tell me, like, yeah, I know you guys think I'm an asshole, so I'm just going to go on and say it for you anyway. I can't imagine that he would think so lowly of himself that he would put that out just to let people know how bad he is. But let's just say, and I'm thinking, okay, what if he really feels that those of us who don't agree with him, that we see him as an asshole? If that's the narrative that we're living in, how do we get past that? How do we understand someone who feels that way? Because on some level, I feel some compassion for him too. For him to think that those of us on the progressive side see him as an asshole, I don't think that could feel good. And I feel some compassion. And one of the reasons that I wanted to make contact with him was I wanted to let him know that I don't know him well enough. I know he's a Trump supporter. I know I don't agree with that, but I don't know him enough to call him an asshole. But I wonder if it's those narratives, Taylor or Michael, if it's those narratives that keeps us separated in the way that Hunter talks about. Is that
Well, you just got to get to know him, and then you'll know he's an asshole. You just
and maybe that would be the way I would name him.
sure.
Even in my worst moments, and Michael has helped me with this actually. And community building, FCE, has helped me with this, which is to not allow at my angriest place for me to name people that way. Is to look at them and say, you are this. Now, I may say your behavior is profoundly immoral or not helpful or doesn't help us build the society that we say we all want. But I try very hard not to name people, because here's an ugly truth, a story about me. When I was 16 and I just left we'd done our work and I was in Spartanburg, South Carolina, and we had been very successful in our civil rights campaign so that we had managed to integrate all of the public facilities. And I, in my 16-year-old mind, thought, we have arrived. There will be no more racism, no more bigotry. I'll be able to walk on the streets and people will just see me as a human being. And of course, that was not true. And then I got bitter. And when I got bitter, I really, really did not like white people. I just simply decided, and this is a thought that came to my head. And I'm saying this to 3 white people who I know I love and care about, and I hope you grant me the grace. I said, in my head, I thought, the only good white person is a dead white person. That's where I went. And I won't say almost instantly, but pretty close to it, I hated myself for that thought. I didn't experience myself as a decent human being, having had that thought. I was hurt and disappointed and disillusioned, but I didn't like myself for that. You're right, Hunter, in the sense that it does take, it takes effort to get beyond that, to grow out of that. I was so upset with myself that I really worked hard to reach out to white people that I did not know and try to make relationships with them. So, Michael, when you talk about the brain, if the brain is functioning this way, is it purely biological? Is it we're only governed by our brain?
Well, I guess it depends what you mean by that.
Well, if you're carrying this notion of bigotry, you
Yeah.
say we have this tendency to protect our tribe. But if you're carrying this idea of bigotry, if that's guided by brain activity, what is that?
Well, like, if we just put aside the idea of a soul for a minute and just like table that part of the conversation
Mhm.
and just say, like, could we describe what you experienced from purely a brain standpoint? So, the way that I would look at that is, you're feeling under threat. The brain creates a story that is useful for self-protection, which is the only good white person is a dead white person. And then for you, that happened to conflict with your identity, which is also, at least in part, mediated by the brain, right? How you think about yourself. And so you were confronted with this story that your brain told yourself to protect you with the story of who you think of yourself as a person. And they were in conflict. And so in psychology, we call that cognitive dissonance, right? So you basically had this situation where you had 2 conflicting ideas and you had to resolve that. And so the way that you went to resolve that is you started talking to, white people and folks that were different than you in order to try to, like, resolve those two stories that your brain was telling yourself.
Mm-hmm.
I think if we want to take this to a more spiritual level, it gets more complicated, right? Because it's like the interaction of your soul with your biology, with the circumstances. I guess what I was thinking about when you were talking was it's a totally like what I would expect most people to have those thoughts. Just insert, different category of person, whatever from whatever perspective you're at, and then people not giving another thought to it. And like that's just the way that they go on.
For me, it's ex-boyfriends, but to each their own.
Yeah, right, exactly, right? I mean, it's like it doesn't have to be, racial. It's like our brain protects ourselves, and it protects our identity. And so,
Do we do we function from our limbic left brain where we're always feeling under threat?
well, I would say that there's like two versions of us always competing for who's driving the car. So there is like the lizard brain, right, which isn't very bright and makes very quick biased decisions and is driven primarily by fear and threat evaluation. And then there's the part of your brain that most people would think of themselves as like, that's me. And, the challenge is that first and foremost, the brain is designed to keep us alive from physical threats, like literal physical threats, like a snake biting us or whatever. And so it's much stronger than the parts of our brain that we think of as us. And so it's usually driving the car. And so it takes effort for you to drive instead of it driving. Like one way to like think of this, which is a little bit not a direct connect, but it kind of gets at the same idea as, you may have heard like it takes three positive experiences to make up for one negative one with a person. And it's that same idea, right? It's like the part of your brain this is like how like they kind of come up with this math of like that part of your brain being like three times stronger. Because it's like it takes three positive experiences to make up for that one negative one with a person just to break even.
If I were to ask each of you this question, what is the state of white America today? Are they under threat? Have they been under threat? I sometimes ask myself if white people are experiencing PTSD, given, I mean, and I'm talking about white as just a norm, not specific white people. If as a norm, white people are experiencing threat, and that is leading to the kind of responses that we're getting from.
I think that's tough to I think there's too many subgroups of white people to make a statement that is like a blanket statement.
Yeah,
And what I mean by that is it's not just like I don't even just mean politically. I just, like what's their daily experience? Where do they live? Who are they around? How much is their, what are their economic circumstances? How much are their economic circumstances uncertain right now? All of that's going to factor into, what we're seeing. The thing that is, I think, true is, we're experiencing more change now than ever before, and that's only accelerating. And, an unfortunate side effect of the brain is, yes, it's designed to keep us alive from physical threats like snakes, but it treats social threats as if they are physical threats. So when people's ideological beliefs are threatened, they treat that as if their life is at stake, as opposed to it being an idea, like a difference of opinion. The brain doesn't react to it like it's a difference of opinion. They react to it like someone's about to kill me. And so I think we do when we're seeing a lot of that kind of response in not just in the US, but across the world right now. Like all the movements towards nationalism and everything else.
Why is that, Michael? Why does the brain? What's the go back to the chimps trying to survive? Of
Yeah, well, I guess I mean, I don't know for sure, right? Because it's not my area of expertise. But what I would suspect is that it's just a matter of efficiency, right? Like, why would you have a separate network to deal with threats, right? It's like you'd have like one system that deals with that. Why does identity matter? I think our social nature is a is an adaptive strategy for survival, right? So like our species chose to be social in order to facilitate our survival, and therefore that social aspect is connected to our physical survival. And so in a world where our physical survival really isn't at risk, it's like the brain is still catching up to that reality. So like, oh, you're gay, like somehow that's like a threat to me.
So, Taylor, and so I'm interested in your thinking. There is no white identity. So there's no white identity. White people are so different that we really can't claim a white identity. I'm asking.
So I do agree with what my dad was saying. As you were asking the question before, I agree with my dad that like there's not all white people aren't the same. All people aren't the same. There's too many different experiences. There's too many different things that someone could go through to build them who they are. You learn that in psychology class. It's one of the biggest things that's like really kind of helped me to not be as angry at people, because so many things like mental illnesses and like BPD or just like anything on that level, and like hatred and anger, like a lot of that comes from just all the experiences that they've had. And part of me kind of wonders, well, maybe if, and this is dreaming, but maybe if like more of America was subjected to diversity, I wonder maybe if things would be a little bit different.
Mm-hmm.
Because as like my dad's talking about, of like, well, the brain kind of like they experiences like different opinions and social stuff like as a physical threat, maybe because some people live in such diverse communities, they physically don't have the option to live like that. They're subjected to everybody's completely different, everybody's opinions very different, so often that it kind of numbs out that thinking. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
you get desensitized to the change and like the differences that you kind of have to like move on. And I just wonder, maybe that's like part of an issue. And so then I wonder if people were subjected to more change and more differences, maybe they would grow to be more comfortable with it.
Yeah.
I mean, just to say it a different way, like undoubtedly there is some white person that lives near you that had a Biden sign on their lawn,
Yes.
right? And so, so it's like, it's kind of like, who do you want to talk about? Because, like, I just think that the ethnicity thing just is too big. It's like saying, like, what's the black identity? It's like, well, you could, I would think there's black Trump supporters,
Yeah.
right? So it's like, I just think it's too big of a category to make statements about.
I'm wondering if this is a function of race, because Black people for the most part, see white people as uniform, a one group of folks who hate them, who hate us, because that's the way it's shown up. That's the way it's shown up. We watch white people tolerate witnessing a Black man being shot in the back by a white person, and there's no response. We've witnessed Trayvon Martin being shot, innocent kid on his way home. And white people as a whole do not respond to that. They don't respond to the suffering of Black people and other people of color, but particularly Black people. So while white people see themselves as these little discrete identities, which I don't disagree with, I think logically and biologically that makes sense. But as an identity group, they seem to be pretty clear about how they feel about Black people. As a matter of fact, it's interesting because I was listening to this podcaster who said unequivocally, and I was shocked, he said it out loud, white conservatives hate Black people. And he was actually saying it to the black people that had voted for Trump. He was basically saying, you guys have been, they hate me to a person. So there's this, we see this sort of monolithic whiteness where you see, which I actually think is adequate, that white people are not a monolith. They come in all different shapes, sizes, attitudes, and beliefs. And that, I mean, that is true. That must be true. But in their response, in their social response to black people, it seems pretty uniform.
Well, but even in like your example, you said white conservatives, so you've already constrained the group,
Yes. And
right?
yeah,
And I would also,
well,
and
yeah, because that's what got said. I mean, that's what,
I understand, but that's also, but that's, it's like the more you constrain the group, the easier it's going to be able to talk about like a prevailing view,
right.
right? And it's like, so it's like if I reversed it, right, and said something like, well, all black people are violent criminals, you would immediately say, well, yes, there are some people like that, but it certainly isn't representative of all black people. And I just think there's this brain tendency to categorize the outgroup in some kind of like uniform way as a way to be able to quickly, it's like it's the same kind of bias that's self-protection, right? It's like if you categorize all white people as a threat, that is far safer than having to sit there and discern, well, is this white person going to kill me or is this white person going to like, greet me?
Yes, I hear that. And I will also say, because white people have been so anemic in their response to overwhelming abuse and mistreatment of black people, it's hard for black folks to decipher out who's the good white person versus a not so good white person unless you know them intimately. And because of our tendency to separate ourselves by race and class, those opportunities for, I think Hunter said this, knowing people and getting to know their stories is severely limited. And when you see day after day after day the kind of mistreatment that black people and other people of color experience under the hands of white supremacy, it's hard not to make that global judgment. And
Totally.
when you recognize that, black people were brought here enslaved, and there was just a systematic intent to deny black people their rights in a free society, it's hard not to sort of make that global. Like this is just what white people do. And it's really tough for me because I know you all, and I have other people that I love and care about who are white. It's tough for me to hear black people say, well, you know what, you just can't trust a white person. I don't care. They could have a halo on their head, they could come from church, they could whatever. You cannot trust white people because at the end of the day, they will turn on you if you're a black person. That is a tragic attitude, I think, and one that gets me in a lot of trouble because I often say, look, I know why I look, I have white people that I love, so I'm sorry. I can't hear that. I get in trouble. You know, I sometimes wonder if there is a race war. I could see myself knocking on the door of a black person that says, no, hell no, you're not coming in here because you like white folks. You ain't coming. I mean, I can just, that's my sort of my anxious fantasy about where I would belong if there was a real conflict between black people and white people. It's hard to, as an African American woman, it is hard to see where the good white people are unless I'm doing what I do, which is not to be afraid of individual white people, to sort of make those connections when they're open to it and to really push through sort of a visceral fear about, okay, this is a white person I do not know who is smiling at me and willing to make contact, but I do not know them? Do I risk the connection, believing that they will cause me no harm? And that is a conversation we have in the Black community a lot. Which white people can we trust, and how do we know?
I mean, yeah, this is a really interesting conversation because the original question, right, was like, is there like a prevailing white person view? And that's what I resisted saying, like, yes, there's like one view and, that's all you need to know. It's a very different question to say, like, should you trust white people? You know, uh, that's a good question. I don't know. Like, maybe is it worth it? Maybe it's not worth it. You know, it's like there's a because trust sort of implies like when the shit hits the fan, are they going to be there for you? And what kind of shit is it going to be for them to be there for you? And it's like there's a whole bunch of white people that don't hate you, but they're not going to be there when the shit hits the fan.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't say that that's purely a racial thing. I think that's people, but it's certainly that's certainly a factor, right? I think there's probably very few white people who, if you tested like subconscious in group kind of testing, right? Like there's probably very few white people that view black people as their in group, right? Like that's their default bias is that black people are their in group. And so, you know, the indifference that you talk about, like people don't care about what happens to outgroup members unless it's something that is really dramatic. So watching somebody put their knee into the throat of somebody else for 7 minutes and watch them die, like people cared about that. But watching an officer shoot a black person in the back as they run away from them, they don't care. And I guess it just doesn't surprise me. And that I think gets lost is that is like a universal brain thing that happens all over the world with different cultures and different races and different folks playing out the same challenges that we're living out here just differently.
But that would seem to be our lower level functioning. Don't we have a higher level than that in our brains that say, look, we're human beings, we need each other, we're social beings. Can't we just lift ourselves up past our limbic lizard brain to see people differently?
Well, that's the whole conversation around, like, in my view, that we're trying to transition to this more relational culture as, abundance becomes the norm, right? And we could have that conversation again. But typically, no. The answer to that is like the thing that starts to change that is not our humanity, but shared goals, some reason that we need to work together. So, aliens came down and started shooting at us. It was suddenly like black people are great, but those aliens are the ones that, like, only good alien's a dead alien, right? That's what would happen very quickly, is that kind of thought process. And we see that when there's like natural disasters, right? They're like I mean, I'd be very curious to hear like just the recent like floods in North Carolina. Like, there's probably very little consideration for like what color you are. It's like, how do we just like survive this situation, come together? Like we talk about that in community building, right? It's like,
Yeah.
when the disaster comes, it's like the barriers to connection go away. We come together in ways that we haven't experienced before. And then the problem with that is being the way to connect is that when the disaster ends, the barriers go back up, right? So the whole point of community building is to say that there's a way to do this intentionally. But I wouldn't say it's the default. So like when you say like, isn't there another part of our brain that we could use? Yes, there is, but it requires effort. And one of the things I found very interesting about COVID is because no one was working, people had time to get upset about all the stuff that we would talk, that we might talk about, saying like, why aren't people upset about this? What I heard is like people didn't have time to be upset before. They were like too busy just trying to survive and make enough money to live, and then they come home and they're exhausted and they just can't spend energy on other stuff. And then when COVID was around, people had lots of energy to get upset because we weren't doing anything. So it's really like, how do we find common goals where we genuinely need each other? And how do we, until our brains continue to evolve to be more relational and less, scarcity driven, how do we support that effort that is required to come together in ways that are unfamiliar to most people?
Yeah, it's interesting. Hunter, I want to just check in with you about this because it seems to me when I hear Michael talk that this country, more than any other country, had the ability to do it right. We have always been prosperous. I know we have this lie, we talk about scarcity, but in many ways, America has always been prosperous. We had the right principles, liberty and justice for all. We hold these truths to be self-evident. And I think I'm hearing Michael say that working toward a multicultural democracy is not enough to pull us together. That common goal of building a society, a more perfect union, isn't enough to do the work that he talks about in terms of us being able to join together to create a society that we think is valuable and will protect us all and keep us safe. And I'm just curious about when you hear this, what comes up for you?
Money and power. And that, yeah, we had the right intentions, but slave owners wanted to keep their land.
You mean
So
other people's land?
other people's land, thank
Right.
you. That's exactly right. They wanted, that we stole in the first place
Oh, in the
from this
first
country.
place, right?
So we stole it out of the gate, and then we're saying, okay, it's mine now. And then we're going to get other people to work on it for free and treat them horribly and brutally, atrocities to these people. And then we're going to have a civil war to sort of give them rights, but not really. It's just this. And then we're going to convince other white people that are poor that the black people are the problem. And the rich white men are going to stay in power, and they're going to make sure that these people hate each other so that they can stay in power, and that they're going to fight, and then it's their problem, right? And then we can kind of, and that's, when even though I would say I'm an optimistic person, the thing that comes up, and you've heard me say this before, Lutricia, is that as we've been making this show, is like, this country has never been good. It's actually never been good for anyone but straight white men, but only straight rich white men.
Right. Very small
Like,
numbers.
yeah, they're at the top. Like, I have it way better than a lot of people just by the way I look and present. Hands down. Just happens in this country because of racism, and that I am look like a dude with a mustache, It's like that just gets me privileges out of the gate. So it's never really been good. And I think there's been this honeymoon period for America when we had Obama as president. And we're like, oh, great. Like, white people got to feel like it wasn't a problem anymore. There's a black president. What do you mean there's racism? Look, there's a black president, sort of excuse. And before that, when America was, there was, before Bush, we weren't in a war. So there was this little window when the economy was good for some people. And we just got to have, really, in my lifetime, in the span of my lifetime of being a baby to about when I was a teenager, and then some other respites with like the Obama days, it's like, oh, it doesn't seem so bad in America, even though it wasn't true. There was still plenty of horrible things happening. But there was this sort of illusion, I think, for white people in particular, to be like, oh, it's way better now. Maybe it was like a tiny bit better, but I think it was mostly smoke and mirrors for white people to get to feel better about the situation. And then we got to see how untrue that was when the shit really started to hit the fan and white people had the energy to pay attention. I completely agree with Michael that when you aren't worrying about feeding your family or just paying your rent, it's easier to pay attention to things and it's easier to have more energy for things. And then we get back to work and then it's like, I got to get back to work. I can't think about that.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, I mean, to me, that just like hits so many points. I mean, for an in group, like for people that you consider in your in group, democracy is the natural way to make decisions, but only for people that are in your in group, right? So when you go back, it's like white male property owners who had similar interests. They believed in democracy for that group. Their intention was never for it to be, beyond that.
Well, they,
And
they
I guess,
said all then because they said all.
Yeah.
and it's like this notion that somehow, I mean, there was this idea, this ideal of like, your your effort or having some kind of autonomy over your life and your circumstances, I think is powerful, continues to be powerful. But yet at the same time, it's sort of like this country was founded on the idea of like, how do you extract value from everything, from the land, from the people around you? And, to me, it's like, just fast forward, it's like that's the battle that we're in now, right? Of like, the power brokers are basically saying, we want to continue to do that, right? So we don't want to pay people that work. We don't want to pay them a good wage. And then what we do pay them, we get back from them in the form of, what they pay to live and rent. And we give them food that isn't actually food. And then we charge them for their health care because they're eating things that aren't good for them, right? It's like this cycle of like, how do you extract every ounce of value from everything around you? How do you stay in power if you're doing that? Well, you make sure that everyone else is just fighting with each other over, their own personal ideologies, right? And it's like the Republicans are very effective at that.
Mhm. So, Taylor, you listen to these three sort of grown folks, more grown than you, talk about the state of our society and our relationships, racial differences. You have a lot more road in front of you than any of us. And I'm wondering what you're hearing and the meaning of what you've been listening to this conversation. What comes up for you when you hear us talk about our country, our society, how we come together, don't come together, the meanings we make of our existence? You're 23 and building a future. What are you hearing?
I'm hearing that this is a complicated problem that has existed since America has been founded. And I think, having some experience doing psychology classes and like understanding, because my father also raised me with a little bit of understanding of neuroscience and like kind of what's instinct, why the brain kind of does stuff, what goes through people's minds, and probably why it's happening. I really question how long is this problem going to last? Like, is it going to just last till I'm a great grandma? Or is it going to be a problem that never really goes away because of humans and their tendencies and what they're kind of like? And part of me also, as I'm hearing this, wants me to appreciate smaller wins. So, for example, like I do have friends who, I wouldn't say they're like advocate, like extreme Trump supporters. I wouldn't say that. I would say they're more or less like, I'm going to pick this person because this is, I feel a little more comfortable with this person rather than like another person. I wouldn't sit here and say like any of them like actively support all the choices he's making and do hate him, but are still a little more Republican than I am. I take it as a win if that person sees me as someone in their in group and they actively know that I'm on the opposite side of the spectrum. And the win for me is where I can sit there, have a conversation about the political state of America, and neither one of us are going to sit there and be angry at each other for the fact that we have an opposite view on certain things and we feel differently on stuff. In my mind, it gives me hope that maybe because, like, let's just say maybe they disagree with something politically and they know maybe I agree with it, but maybe because they have this idea of, I enjoy Taylor. She's my friend and I like her and I like being around her and she believes in these things. Maybe these things aren't as crazy as I feel like they are. And that gives me hope of we can find something of a common ground. I think it's a little bit easier to find common ground when there's like a big thing that everyone can connect to. For smaller examples, everyone that I'm friends with, we're all around each other because of games. That could be board games, that could be video games, it could be anything like that. I guess the question is, what's something that's big enough that enough people can kind of care about from all different beliefs and everything, like race, ethnicity, political beliefs and such, that enough people care about it to bring them together, to have it in their brain of, well, I like this one big thing and there's other people. Maybe I talk to the other people and we can bond on that.
Wow. Well, my next bumper sticker is Taylor Schmidt for president.
Oh.
Because I just think you just close this out with the beautiful vision of what I think we would want this world to look like or this society to look like in your time. That we would want people doing what you say is a win for you. So happy to know that you're going forward. I feel some hope in that. Yeah.
I
So
love that we have the Z, Millennial, Gen X, and Boomer all on.
right. Yeah. 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 It's great. So look, thank you for this conversation. It's exactly, I wanted people to know us and know what our work is about. And I think they'll get a good picture of that. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining our podcast. Please visit our website, everybodyasourOwn.org, and join our monthly HEAR, HEAR, and NOW conversations. If you appreciate this content, please like and subscribe to us. It is deeply appreciated. See you next time.